Bethesda has a perception problem. This is kind of a new thing. You've seen a lot of people in the past defend Bethesda so many times about their overall game design, their engine, and their writing, and so many design decisions that have been controversial. We saw that with Fallout 4 in terms of the art design and the overall clunkiness of the gameplay. Fallout 76, we don't even need to get into that mess. But with Starfield especially, a lot of people felt that datedness, and a lot of my opinions were actually recently reflected in a new Nakey Jakey video, which has amassed like almost 4 million views in the last week. And it was pretty much my opinion of that video was like, yeah, this is what a lot of us have been saying for a long time now. And it does finally feel like people have just had enough with Bethesda. And that's why Starfield, there is this big feeling of it just did not deliver enough. And that's why it does feel like right now, the opinions, the feelings on the Elder Scrolls 6 just aren't as positive as they probably should be, especially since it's going to be about 15 or so years between Skyrim to the Elder Scrolls 6. There should be a lot of anticipation for this, but there is a little bit of that nervousness. That's that concern that I personally feel, because I don't know what we're going to be getting from this. If it's just going to be another Starfield, in which it's kind of disappointing. Now, it does need to be said, if you go on to OpenCritic, Starfield does have mostly positive reviews. That's why it does feel like the perception that a lot of people have about Bethesda versus the reality, it's interesting, because Starfield was it was received well mostly from critics, but it just doesn't feel like it was good enough. And I think that's the problem. When Xbox was doubling down, this is one of the best RPGs ever, it's going to be coming out, people are going to be playing this for 10 years to come. That's what Xbox marketing kept on going and over, and I don't see that reality, unfortunately. And if you actually go onto Steam, there is a drastic difference between reviews from critics and users, because on Steam, it has about 85,000, and it's just 2/3 positive. That's insane. I mean, if you compare this, I think Fallout 4 has around like 80% liking it. Fallout 76 even has like 75%. And then we have Starfield, which is in the 60%. That's just crazy to me. And that shows that a lot of people were very dissatisfied with this game, and you can understand that perspective, I think. I don't think this boils down to, oh my god, Xbox bad, PlayStation good, or whatever. I think it's more complicated than that, because the design, the loading screens, the way they went about fast travel, planet exploration, 1,000 planets, there's just so many parts of Starfield that it can work for some people, and then for others it doesn't, especially because I think Bethesda's world building, which is one of their greatest strengths, just isn't really on full display with Starfield, because everything's so far apart. So it is worth mentioning that Starfield definitely still does have a player base. This is just Steam alone. I'm sure in Xbox it has a lot more, but yeah, 11 to 15,000, that's decent. And I think Cyberpunk had that around like the first month after release and such, and I'm sure this is only going to increase with time once better mods come out and once Bethesda starts to release DLC and such. And they've actually already started to outline some of their plans for the game. City maps and new ways of traveling are coming to Starfield. City maps is something that another UI decision that probably should have been fixed a long time ago, but Bethesda just has not been doing a good job about handling any of this. It does feel like this company is very salty about how people are very negative about Starfield. We saw this recently in some what appear to be like AI generated reviews. Starfield isn't boring, actually, Bethesda tells Steam reviewers. They just were responding to almost every single negative Starfield review with AI generated nonsense for the most part. They were just talking about highlights of the game, not actually, responding to the essays that some users were providing with their criticisms of Starfield. Kind of felt like a slap in the face, I would say. But it also just made a lot of people even more sour with this company. But it is worth mentioning that the PR surrounding Starfield just continues to be very negative. This was an interesting headline going around. Starfield multiplayer modders give up because the game is trash. That's just absolutely harsh. And then we get to what I would consider the big news that a lot of people have been talking about for the last day or two. And this is a thread that came from a design director that worked on Starfield, one of the big guys at Bethesda. And he called out unfair game criticism. Don't fool yourself into thinking you know why it is the way it is. And there's no way of not taking these quotes and what he goes on to add and trying to not to make it about Starfield, because it actually is. He doesn't say Starfield specifically, but it's quite clear this is a reaction to the negative reception going around, and maybe even that new Nakey Jakey video, which talks about Bethesda's design being out of date about 10 years ago, which is an accurate statement, something I've complained about endlessly for so many years now. But I think finally a lot of people are waking up to the reality that Bethesda just doesn't really fit into this modern gaming, and the excuses that a lot of people use, and I've seen this so many times in my videos, comment sections, and on Twitter, it's just a Bethesda game that doesn't really work anymore. Especially because a lot of the criticisms that I personally have just goes into the overall design and the feeling of their Gamebryo engine, which is their creation engine, then Creation Engine 2. It still feels like a very dated engine, and obviously the answer just isn't immediately, oh, they need to jump on Unreal Engine. I don't know what the answer is for Bethesda. I just know that these games don't feel as good as that they should. And also, when I compare it to other developers, even Ubisoft in some regards, I think that they have more fluid experiences, especially in terms of combat in some regards. If Bethesda continues down that road with, say, The Elder Scrolls 6 with that clunky combat, I don't know how I'm going to feel about that. But again, it has been like about 15 or so years between these games, so who knows what to expect out of it, and that's kind of the concern right now, especially after Starfield. So, like I said, Emil Pagliarulo, ooh, I cannot say that right, says an awful lot of outspoken critics are disconnected from the realities of development. Now, Emil has a reputation. If you guys may not know, I believe he was the lead narrative writer on Fallout 4, and he said some very interesting things in regards to crafting narratives in the past. He has a reputation for his Kiss video, which we've talked endlessly about in the past. And actually, for the first time the other day, Emil responded to this reputation that he has had in this specific video, saying that it misrepresented what he said, the Reddit threads about it. Apparently, I also don't care about Fallout lore, can't write to save my life, and have the IQ of a peanut. It's on the internet, so it must be true. And in another response, he says people can blame him for everything. I don't care. That comes with my position. What really bugs me is calling a piece of my work crap when it's not crap, and it's not even mine. That just does such a disservice to the people I've watched work so hard for so long. And specifically with that latter tweet, it's a response to a lot of people over the years saying that Fallout 4's writing is terrible. It's shit compared to some of the previous entries, especially people compared to Obsidian with what they did on New Vegas. And with Emil specifically, I think he was credited as the narrative director, the main writer on Fallout 4, so yeah, a lot of people often target him and say that he is a terrible writer. And yeah, he obviously isn't happy with that. He also seemed to take issue with some of the praise that has been given over the years with Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, and that's because, at least for the longest time, a lot of people were under the assumption that it was largely written by a different Bethesda developer, so that's why it was good, Will Shen. But Emil seems to insinuate that he did a lot of writing on Far Harbor and people just don't understand what he actually contributed, although he doesn't specify specifically what he did. But Emil, very outspoken individual, and that's why he took to his Twitter profile, and he had, like I said, it's a very interesting thread. He said, long thread, funny how disconnected some people are from the realities of game development, and yet they speak with complete authority. I mean, I can guess what it takes to make a Hostess Twinkie, but I don't work in the factory, so what in the hell do I really know? Not a lot, but a lot of people have been pointing this out. You can tell when a Hostess Twinkie just doesn't taste right, and that's the same thing with, I think, entertainment in general, whether that be a movie or a game. You know when it's not good, and I think that you can provide valid criticism. You don't actually have to be knowing the behind the scenes completely to know if something's good or not. But he continues. Part of me really gets it. When you're a consumer and spend money on things, that gives you the right to complain about those things. I spend a lot of money on games every year, and sometimes it takes a lot for me to scream into the internet's collective consciousness. I don't complain about games on social for two main reasons. Well, he works in games, and I'm sure he kind of doesn't want to do that and hurt his reputation. I know how hard it is to make games and have too much respect for my fellow developers. That obviously also contributes. I work for a game studio and it would be uncool and unprofessional for me to do so, but I sometimes want to, oh boy. And okay, like I said, most people don't have these constraints and are free to post whatever they want. The internet is a glorious wild, wild west, and I wouldn't have it any other way. There was a time when I exercised that right very freely. When I was writing game reviews for the Adrenaline Vault forever ago, I was absolutely that person who would say whatever I wanted about a game, good or bad. Sometimes the good was over enthusiastically too good, and sometimes the bad was me being a sarcastic asshat. But throughout that time, I actually had no inkling what game development was actually like, how hard the designers, programmers, artists, producers, and everyone else worked, the struggle to bring a vision to life with constantly shifting resources, the stress. Now, I'll stop right there and just point out that I think most people understand how difficult game development is. But they also understand that when people have been screaming about, design flaws, say, with a Bethesda game for so long, and it's just kind of been thrown into the wind and ignored, people are going to continue to get upset. They're going to voice that frustration even more and more, and that's what we kind of have been seeing with Bethesda the last couple of years. And I do feel like now Bethesda, at least it does seem like, because of the reaction we are seeing in those Steam reviews and now this thread right here, it does seem, at least internally, they're a little salty about how people are upset about the game. And also, I'm sure it was probably a little bit of an embarrassment at the Game Awards, in which Starfield won no awards, didn't even get nominated for Game of the Year. I'm sure that irks Todd Howard and his team a little bit, but Emil does continue. He says, "It's the nature of AAA game development, but I also have a great position and am still gainfully employed after 21 years. A blessing considering the thousands of layoffs this year," which, I think there's been around 10,000 layoffs in gaming. Just very unfortunate. "I'm not trying to change anyone's mind because of the internet, but given my position, I cannot share the truth. And that truth is, I can't not share the truth. And that truth is, nobody sets out to make a bad game, of course. Although definitely a lot of game developers and publishers like to cut corners, as we have found out with Fallout 76's development. And most game devs are incredibly talented, even if the game they release isn't up to par. See, I never knew this before, but if nothing else, video game development is a series of concessions and tough decisions. There's that perfect game you want to make, and then there's the game you can make. Sometimes, if the gods smile on you, those two are very close. But in order to get there, in order to get it as close as possible to the vision, the team has to push itself harder and harder, often while dealing with devs being shuffled around or leaving, looming deadlines, and creative decisions you wish you didn't have to make. Now, I understand that. I also realize that Bethesda is not your normal AAA game studio, especially when you have the backing of a studio like Microsoft. They had extra time. And I do feel like a lot of this just sounds like excuses for why X, Y, and Z happened. And to a degree, I understand that with a lot of games, especially I do understand that with Starfield a little bit. The game probably did have to come out this year, but I also realize that some of the issues I have with it, they've been defended in these AI-generated responses. The game's boring. Well, you just don't understand Starfield. That's ridiculous in my opinion. I think a lot of people have the feeling that Starfield probably would have been a lot better if it was just set in one system, if there was just 9 or so planets to explore, and there was tons of content just put in those planets alone. So definitely, I don't really understand this. Emil goes on, he says, "And team is absolutely the operative word there. Lots and lots of folks doing lots and lots of work, writing, level building, making character models, coding game systems, trying to schedule it all out so it can get done and folks don't burn out, and on and on. So sure, you can dislike parts of a game, you can hate on a game entirely, but don't fool yourself into thinking you know why it is the way it is, unless it's something documented and verified, or how it got to be that way, good or bad." Which, again, I just feel like this is a reaction to a lot of the tweets, a lot of the videos now going out saying that Starfield's design is out of date. And I don't think anybody's exactly saying that we know the process of how Starfield, or maybe just games in general, came to be. But we do know when something is hot garbage. Look at Saints Row the remake. I think a lot of us walked away with knowing that that game's development likely was an absolute disaster, and the reports and everything that came afterwards kind of proved that. And that game ended up being bad, quite bad. Chances are, unless you've made a game yourself, you don't know who made certain decisions, who did specific work, how many people were actually available to do that work, any time challenges faced, or how often you had to overcome technology itself. This one is huge. Well, some of that is decided internally and by leadership, and make of that as you will. So yes, love games, buy them, play them, and complain to your heart's content. It's sort of the nature of the developer-player transactional relationship, but just know that the game you're playing is in some ways a freaking miracle in and of itself. Normal people have come together to work for years for one goal: to bring you fun and happiness, so it helps to remember that and them. Now, the reactions to this thread have been quite something, and let's dive into a couple of them. "Nobody cares, you sell for AAA prices and didn't deliver, the modders do, Jesus." LMFAO, "Dude, no one cares how it's made or what it takes to make it. I pay $70, I expect a finished and quality game." And I think that's the point a lot of people are hitting on. $70. People are coughing up a lot of cash for these experiences, and when you promise the moon and don't deliver on that, people have a right to be upset and voice their complaints. And it's not like a lot of the criticisms being delivered in a non-constructive way. It's not like most people are saying this game's hot garbage. A lot of people are pointing out all of the flaws. They have careful essays about all of the different aspects of Starfield that didn't work for them. And that's reflected in those Steam reviews, in which, again, it's not, you can't just say that, oh no, everybody just hates Bethesda because they're Bethesda. There's a reason why only 67% of those reviews are positive. There's a reason why this game was not nominated for Game of the Year, and that isn't just Bethesda bad. Now, again, some more responses. I think this is dancing around the elephant in the room. Todd has a larger-than-life presence at Bethesda, and while it was influential in the creation of the studio in 2023, it's holding it back. The in-house engine is stale but safe. The gameplay feels stuck 10 years ago. And say what you will, but that is a perspective that a lot of people agree with. And yeah, blah, 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 hard work, crying, struggle. Yeah, that's great, but is it fun? No. And then they go on about a lot of their criticisms with Starfield. A couple more that we have. I read this whole thread on the toilet while taking a dump. When I finished, I named it Starfield, which, Jesus, man, Jesus. Players don't need to understand the process to come to the conclusion that your game wasn't good. You're out of touch. Listen, mate, whoever wrote the main story for Starfield did a really shit job. If that's you, I'm sorry. Take the feedback of the players how you will, but if an overwhelming majority tell you the story ain't good, you should do some soul searching, be better. And I actually, personally, I'll disagree with that and say that maybe I'm one of the few that thought that Starfield's narrative was interesting. I say interesting because I thought it was different enough that I appreciated it. I don't think I necessarily loved it, but it's, at least to me, better than a lot of these Bethesda mainline storylines, and that kind of is telling, to be fair, about how mediocre a lot of these are. And I think the real enjoyment out of Bethesda worlds, Bethesda games, is just exploring and taking on side quests, and usually faction quests are the highlight, at least in my opinion. But compared to other space, sci-fi, entertainment, movies, games, I don't think Starfield really does enough to make itself stand out. It's not unique enough. Even up against in gaming, when you think about space sci-fi RPGs, you don't think Starfield. And I don't think you're going to be thinking that in 10 to 15 years. You're still going to be thinking Mass Effect. And even when you think of a Bethesda RPG, the first thing I think of is Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. And again, 10 to 15 years, I don't know I'm going to be thinking Starfield at all either. And that really has to do with the fact that Starfield's identity is heavily linked to what Bethesda has already done with those beloved franchises. But this ties back into Emil's very long rant about the unfair criticism related to game development. But Bethesda, what they're going through right now is what we've seen with a lot of developers that used to be beloved in the early 2000s but have now faded, especially one of those being BioWare. It's just that they have not kept up with the times. And at the Video Game Awards show, which was about a week or two ago, you saw a lot of new great studios that have emerged in the last couple of years. One of those being Larian, and that's one thing that they've done better than what Bethesda has done the last couple of years, is that they have listened to their community. That obviously helps that their Baldur's Gate 3 was in early access for a while, but they listened to the criticism. They listened to what players wanted. And Bethesda, there's been a lot of requests saying, hey, Bethesda, your facial animations, how clunky your combat is, your AI, all of this needs to be improved. Your engine overall seems to be kind of messy. Maybe you guys need to upgrade to something better. And Bethesda's answer really has just been doubling down, and I don't think that's working right now. I understand some people are going to argue that just moving from one engine to another is very, very difficult and it can take years, but I feel like Bethesda has stagnated in terms of their game quality, and it's stagnated, really, if we're being honest, back with Skyrim. There is a need, actually, you know what, scratch that wording, they have to evolve with the Elder Scrolls 6. They need to finally make a major jump in terms of how their games play, the formula that they've made with these games, and really just the feeling of a Bethesda RPG. It can no longer be what it has been, which, say what you want, but we've been playing the same Bethesda game for 10 to 15 years now, and in many people's eyes that is unacceptable, and that is reflected in the user reviews and even in some of those critic reviews. And if they don't, I mean, I only can imagine 2026, 2027, assuming maybe that's when the Elder Scrolls 6 does come about. I mean, some rumors indicate it may be even longer than that, but I do think that the reception's going to be a lot more negative then versus now, especially if Bethesda just continues down this road of keeping with what works. And let me specify that last part, because it's quite clear that Bethesda thinks that what they've been doing, it has been working, but the overall gaming community, there's not a universal consensus of this is great, this is amazing, we love these Bethesda RPGs. Those days are finally over, and now there's a lot of people just with concern. One of those people includes myself, just wondering what the path forward is to success and how Bethesda can, get people to still fall in love with these games in the future. And I just don't know what that is right now, because I don't see that path forward. All I see right now is a lot of salt in the air coming from Bethesda, while the overall gaming community seems to be more divided than ever with these Bethesda RPGs. Anyway, Emil's quotes, his comments have been going viral over social media, a lot of people sharing different perspectives on it. What do you make of them? Let me know down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Consider subscribing for a lot more videos like this, and I'll see you later.